The text for this Sunday from the Gospel of John. I'll just go ahead and stand back here and read that. Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." Our text for today. I sort of wanted a theme, started planning this a while for our visitors. This is sort of the beginning of the end. I think that's how it might be said. We got our usher handing out announcements. Are you? There you go. Thank you. So I wanted to do a series, preparing for my last Sunday at the end of the month and doing a part of that. And as I was thinking about this series and putting the topics together for this service, I wanted to call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'll explain this in a second. Because I thought of it, I wanted to look, when I was looking at today's text, it sort of struck me that the good and the bad are sort of there all in one. I also need this little out here. I'd probably go back a little bit. I doubt any of you realize this, but early in my ministry, I used to take time. One of the first things I discovered is the hard part about preaching. Maybe it was for you, Dave, but the hard part about preaching for me was to keep it short. I remember growing up, being in school, how could he talk so long? Then I got out there and thought, man, this is hard to keep it short. So I usually used to show up on Sunday mornings. If you're here, for example, this morning, about 7 o'clock, I'm running through the sermons and I timed them. I've been thinking about this series for a long time and beginning of the farewells. So I started a list. And I started to think about the good and the bad things that have happened in the past years and what was a part of that. And it got long. It got real long. It's been fun during the past months to put that together. Things I wanted to say and things that I wanted to remember. So that's a part of it. And then, I realized it's too long. So then came that painful process of shortening down, carrying out. Jesus said, pruning the branches, pruning out what couldn't be there. And I shortened that list. And then I came and I put this together, and like your cell phone probably, it has a stopwatch to it, and so I started. And I started working through that list. And after about, I think it was 15 minutes, I decided this isn't going to work, because I'm not even halfway through this list. And I didn't think any of you really wanted to be here till noon, if I managed to shorten that list. So I began to think about our text for today a little bit, and what's involved. And I thought about that. Someone mentioned it. When I look back on the 27 years, for example, I thought of what somebody calls the myth of the golden age and the good old days. I just feel that tempted to talk about the good old days and what they were really like. And I think this is sort of the good and bad. Because here's what I began thinking about. I remember one of the first ministries when I came to Grace. We worked hard for several years to set up a prayer chain and to recruit people to just say, look, when something happens, like Data helps me, when someone goes into the hospital, especially a serious illness, when new birth comes about or when there's a death, we could, rather than wait till the following Sunday, when people could come to church and hear about that, or they might accidentally run into a neighbor, we put this prayer chain together. We could get on the telephone and we could call one another. And as I remember it only took a year or two, but that started working pretty effectively. When something like that would happen during the week, that chain would be pretty much completed within 48 hours. And almost every time something disconnected and didn't work, but for the most part it worked. And that was part of the good old days when I came. We don't use that prayer chain anymore. It's sort of been replaced. I have on several occasions now, the past couple of years, and just recently it went like this. I remember being invited to go to the funeral home with the family at the time of death. And we sat down and we talked about a few things, talked with the funeral director. I think I was there about an hour, hour and a half. And then I came back to church because, you know, we text out or let an email blast out to let people know about that. Except when I got back to church, the phone was ringing, there was somebody in the office, and they said, well, we've heard, we know the arrangements, and this is what we need to know next. And I called some people who were going to help with various things, and yeah, I want you to let you know there's this death. Yeah, I heard about that, and this is what I know already. You know what? The family was sitting there with this thing texting. Before we were finished, the word, the news was out. I thought about the good old days when we were proud of the fact that sometimes the word could get out within 48 hours. Now it's out within minutes. And people are asking. And it's pretty rare that when an event happens, like a birth or a death especially, it's rare that I see somebody a couple days later who hasn't heard. That means either their phone broke, they've been sick and in the hospital, or they've been out of town. Well, if they're out of town, out of the country, they probably still did hear. That too has happened. I thought about that myth of the good old days. And how often some of us are stuck back there and we talk about, oh, how I wish for the good old days. I think back, do we really? I remember early in my ministry, I can't remember if it was here or just before I came here, but I remember going to the hospital to visit somebody who was in one of those wards, getting in ancient time for some. Sometimes they put 3, 4, 6 beds in a room. And there was still, I think, 3 or 4 beds. And there was, I was visiting with one of our members. They had their heads packed in sandbags. They had a catheter in, they had an IV, and they were strapped so that they wouldn't move a thing. They were like that, as I remember correctly, for days. I think at least 5, 6 days. They were having cataract surgery. And I remember a couple years ago, my golfing partner, I guess you'd say, had a cataract surgery. And he had it done, I think it was on a Tuesday. The following Tuesday, he was out on the golf course. I thought about the good old days. He looked a lot more comfortable on the golf course than that guy packed in bags and plugged into all those tubes and those wires. I look back for the good old days and say, why were they so good? Why do we remember? Sometimes I remember the good old days in the church when there was no conflict, when there was no fights, and everything just worked. Everything was there, everything was provided. It was all peaceful and harmony. And then I think it was about the time I went to high school, I realized that's not the way it works. I don't think it was all that much better. I just didn't know. Maybe the good old days weren't because I was so innocent, so naive, or so young to not understand. And as we grow and as we mature, we begin to realize, I think, even more importantly, what Jesus talks about and says, I am the vine and you are the branches and you must stay connected to me. And if you're not connected to me, well, I think there's no life. The good old days when we were small, little immature plants, just how good were they? And what about today? I think of the marvelous opportunities and ease we have to share the gospel. The gospel of caring with one another. The gospel of sharing with each other. And how it is even easier to not only pray to God and read His Word, but we can pick it up on our phones. We can pick it up in any size print. It makes it easier for some of us to read. We can put it in any kind of translation we want. And the gospel is shared. I thought about the myth of the good old days. I think I heard that from somebody just a few months ago that just said, oh, for the good old days. Well, you know what? Were they really so good? Or did we need God to come in? I think that myth in this text talks about the good and the bad. Those good old days, well, they were sort of good. God was present in our lives. And even when I was young and small, He provided me with the nourishment and the growth and the people around me that I needed. Now I grow and I understand even better. And I keep track of this. Because I thought about the stories. The stories that are really just examples of the gospel. And how God brings that life into us each and every day. Sometimes we're struggling. And sometimes I can't see God at work. But God is present there among us. That's who we are as a people of God. And He gives us that strength. He gives us that life that you and I might bear fruit. That is, that we might share that love not only with one another, but within our family and all the world. That's what He's a part of. So it's the good and the bad. Now the ugly. I'm not sure this fits into the text. But I thought it'd be fun to do this. And the ugly, so when I think back of all the memories, especially of this service, it's been fun to watch this service grow over the years and where it started out. I remember when we started outside, it wasn't quite this informal. In fact, I used the same vestments that I did in the first service. And I would be out there in those vestments, in the collar. It was cool to have my jacket on underneath. But I'd be out. And there got into this discussion in the worship committee, as they were wont to do. For several months we got into discussion about changing the service and doing something different. And some people liked it just the way it was. Some people said, well, let's make it a little less formal, because after all, we are outside. So this debate went on. And then I got an inspiration. One 4th of July, I was reading back in the history of our Lutheran Church. Do you know, at the time of the Revolutionary War, when that was all building, there was a Lutheran pastor who preached regularly in favor of freedom and the land. And when the Revolutionary War had finally come about, he got up one Sunday, he preached again about it, and he tore open his robes, and there he had an American general's uniform on. And he invited the men in the room to follow him. And they did. It became part of a famous story. So I had my inspiration. And to make a long story short, I decided to go informal. I was walking through, I think it was a clothes store. And it was about this time of year, and I saw a pair of shorts. And I said, this will do it. So underneath my robes, I did have a black collar on, and I got these shorts. These were summer shorts. They were bright. They were red, favorite color. And I put on a pair of socks. I got my black boots out. I put on 2 pairs of socks, different colors. One sort of flapped down over the top of the boot, the other all the way up to the knee. And I thought the sermon was going pretty good. I got that, and I revealed that. I took the robes off. You know, I said the story of the Revolutionary pastor. I took the robes off and said, what do you think? This is ugly in 2 ways. One, not by my judgment. But afterwards, a new member, visitor, walked up, commented a little bit, they'd been there before, and said, oh, by the way, was your daughter at this service? She was high school age. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact. Did she look like this, dressed like this? And I said, yes, I thought so. I said, why? What was she doing? You know what Dad's thinking. What was she doing? She goes, I saw her reaction when you took your robe off. I still remember, as dads sometimes do, I still remember her words. Dad, you do that again and I'm never coming to church. She still owns that as an adult, by the way. Probably the ugliest part about that was this great inspiration inspiration that I thought fits so well into the text and so well into the life of the congregation and the life of what was going on to the world. When I finished it up, I went back because we had great people in the congregation, some of you that give me great feedback on the sermons. So I started asking, how did that go? Oh, we remember the shorts. They commented on the size. They commented on the way it went and people's laughter and reaction to the thing. But nobody even remembered the gospel that was read. Nobody remembered the point of the sermon. I asked for weeks afterwards, and not one single person had did that. Now, word had gotten out. Word spreads like that. And I look back and I go, well, that's probably the ugliest part of the ministry. From two perspectives. A, it didn't work to communicate the gospel. B, I have orders from a popular masses not to wear those shorts to church now. In fact, that same daughter didn't want to see those shorts worn at a picnic again. Maybe sometimes we get separated from the vine and we don't know it. But it is a part of there. And I've enjoyed the ministry and the time with you. But I think above all, when I look back at what we've accomplished, I think we've stayed connected to where God has leaded us. And sometimes we've strayed and sometimes we've not grown so well. But God has been faithful to us and present with us. For the most part, it's been fun. A little bad, a little ugly, but it's helped us grow. So, let us continue into this day and tomorrow with God present with us. And we share in the bread and wine of communion now. That God may come into our hearts and Jesus may come with new life and new nourishment, that we might live this day and tomorrow